Good evening. Leading the news this Monday, Soviet officials said they were ready to match the proposed U.S. defense cuts. New government reports showed U.S. education levels improving, but still behind other countries. Democratic Senator Bob Kerrey of Nebraska declared his candidacy for president. We'll have the details in our news summary in a moment. Judy Woodruff's in Washington tonight. Judy?
On the NewsHour tonight, we get Soviet reaction to the president's arms cuts announcement firsthand in an exclusive interview with Mikhail Gorbachev's foreign minister, Boris Pankin. Then we resume our series of conversations about the BCCI International Bank scandal. And finally, remembering a genius of American jazz, Miles Davis. Still ahead tonight, the BCCI scandal and a tribute to Miles Davis. Next, we continue our series of conversations about the ongoing BCCI scandal. This week, we get the view from London. In the United States, questions about the Bank of Credit and Commerce International are focusing on how that bank managed illegally to gain control of Washington, D.C.-based First American Bank shares. In Britain, an even more fundamental question of bank regulation and operation is at stake. Charlene Hunter-Gauld has the story.
It was in London that BCCI maintained its worldwide operational headquarters, and that's where a lot of the pain is now being felt by small businesses and other depositors, most of whom are of Asian descent. Since July, when BCCI was shut down by the British, the web of intrigue has expanded to a tale of a bank within a bank that practiced fraud and corruption around the world. Allegations include ties to dictators who used BCCI to raid their national treasuries and enrich themselves. Terrorists such as Abu Nidal, who is said to have kept an account in a London branch, and intelligence organizations, including the CIA, which is said to have used the bank to move funds. In Britain, criticism for poor oversight has focused on the Bank of England, Britain's chief regulatory agency, and its head, Robin Lee Pemberton, who recently explained to a parliamentary committee why the bank remained open until this year.
I mean, there was a lot of talk about this bank, and it was rumor and it was suspicion, maybe. It was certainly not information on which the Bank of England could necessarily act, as I've explained.
BCCI's founder, Aga Hassan Abedi, started the bank in Pakistan in the early 1970s, and for the next 2 decades he befriended influential people around the world, always portraying his bank as a force for good for poorer people and nations in the Third World. One of those who's followed the BCCI story the longest is TARIQ Ali, a Pakistani-born journalist who now lives and works in London. This summer, Ali prepared a documentary on BCCI for Britain's Channel 4. I spoke to TARIQ Ali recently in London and asked him to describe BCCI's founder.
Aga Hassan Abedi is a self-made man. His father used to be a cook on the estates of a feudal landlord in undivided India during the days of British rule and British occupation. And this landlord was quite a benevolent figure. He saw that the boy had talent, and he paid for him to be educated and helped him along. And Abedi grew up as a talented young banker. He's very intelligent, there's no two ways about that. But he also developed increasingly, once he'd set up the BCCI, a streak of megalomania. He became like one of those gurus of the cults which proliferated in the 60s and 70s, inspired that sort of loyalty, and had very mystical notions about how to run the bank. For instance, he devised a thing called the concept, which was a sort of nonsensical rules which made no sense, except to give him total control over every aspect of the bank. And he ran the bank like a total dictator. He knew everything that was going on. To heads of states, to people of influence and power, he had another face. This was the face of a humble man. There is a character in one of Charles Dickens's novels, David Copperfield, the character of Uriah Heep, who always pleads that he's humble. So Abadi was also a bit of that.
Was BCCI banned from the very beginning?
In my opinion, it was. I think that the bank was set up very, very clearly to make money illegally. I think that was the aim of the operation. I think that the people that were involved in setting up the bank were intent on bending the rules in order to make money. And I think the very way the bank was set up was an indication that something was crooked. In 1980, I received a telephone call. It was someone I didn't know before. It was someone who was a banker and who came to me highly recommended from other contacts. I met this person in a remote suburb, and he said to me, "Have you heard of a bank called the BCCI?" And I said yes, because they were already becoming well known and well established. And he said, "Well, I'm going to tell you the whole story of how this bank was set up." This was Abadi's, one of his associates, who later on became a banker in another country and doesn't want to be identified. And the story I heard for about 8 hours that night was so incredible that I took detailed notes and later I wrote it up. And the story was that when Mr. Abadi was working for the United Bank Limited in Pakistan, he was head of their foreign exchange reserves and on the board of directors. What Abadi did was he used his position to give a loan to 4 people. A loan, I am told, in the region of £2.5 million. With this loan money, his 4 friends went and set up the ICIC, the holding company which launched the BCCI on the Cayman Islands. This money, which he had taken from the UBL as loans, was then written off as bad debts. And if my informant was correct, and so far no one has denied this story, then the very beginnings of the BCCI were murky. So that's how the bank began. And the aim of Abadi was to set up a multinational third world bank which could cross frontiers with ease and which could help transfer black money and illegal money and criminal money from one part of the world to another. I am convinced that this was the aim of the bank from its very inception.
Not as an instrument to help third world peoples as it was proclaimed?
No. I do not believe that the bank had any idea of helping third world people, except in a very marginal, limited sense, that its employees were largely from the Indian subcontinent, mainly from Pakistan and some from Bangladesh. But that help only went to a very tiny number of people. Apart from that, I don't believe in any of this demagogy which is coming out that we're a third world bank, that's why we are being victimized by the West, etc., which is the predominant line. I don't believe that.
So are you saying that what is being called the black network, or the bank within the bank, which is the criminal enterprise, was the real motivating entity?
I think that it was that network which set up the bank. Without that network, the bank wouldn't have come into being. And I am very, very dubious about those people high up in the bank who claim that they did not know that these things were going on. Maybe they didn't. If they didn't, all I can say is that they were very naive.
How was Abadi treated in Pakistan, and what was his relationship to the government?
Initially, of course, he was treated like any other banker, but soon he developed a very close relationship with General Zia-ul-Haq, who was the military dictator in Pakistan from 1977 to 1987-88, when he was blown up. And Abadi's plane would arrive at Islamabad airport, and the president's car would sweep in onto the tarmac, pick him from his plane and take him straight to President's house without any formalities. Essentially, Abadi ran a state inside a state. He had every possible privilege. He took over the country's oil industry. He had the country's entire rice crop mortgaged. He gave loans to top generals, to top civil servants. He bought the country. And when the country was taken over by the heroin mafia, a lot of the heroin money came out to the West through the BCCI.
Tell me a little bit about that.
All the top drug enforcers from the United States knew that heroin was being used to finance some of the Afghan rebels. They were very worried about it. They complained. But nothing was done. Gradually, General Zia and the Pakistani generals, whose initial reaction was, we don't care about heroin, our people don't take it. It goes to the United States and it goes to the West, that's their problem. But gradually what happened is that Pakistan, which had 56 registered heroin addicts in 1977 when General Zia took over, in 10 years' time had 1.25 million registered addicts. Officially and unofficially, the figure was higher. So a heroin mafia developed, massive amount of money was made, and this money was used to pay off politicians, generals, civil servants, and by and large they wanted the money kept abroad. In order to get the money abroad, they needed a bank. A bank which was very useful was the BCCI, because that bank could transfer money anywhere. So there'll be lots of very, very disturbed and depressed faces amongst the Pakistani elite because the bank has now been closed down.
Were there any legitimate enterprises that BCCI was involved with?
Yes, I think they operated as a bank. They tried to operate as a bank as well they could. Lots of small investors of Asian background used to invest or put their money in. For one reason, because it was a friendly bank. For another reason, if you're a small shopkeeper and you're taking, say, for a month, have amounted to, say, let's say $20,000 or more, $200,000. You don't want to declare all this to the Inland Revenue. You go into the bank and the bank says you can put it in, but you can tell the Inland Revenue that you've only banked $100,000 rather than $200,000. So they were useful even on a small level to people in circumventing laws. They then attempted to organize a media empire. They launched South Magazine, they launched Third World Quarterly, they were very heavily involved in financing some pages in the Guardian newspaper in this country, which, I mean, they were legal enterprises, but they were always used as fronts to ease the way for the bank to enter more and more countries.
In what way?
Well, the editor of South, or who was earlier chief editor of the Guardian's Third World Review, would turn up in Nigeria. He would interview the Nigerian head of state, give him a fantastic interview, a PR job, totally uncritical. This would be published in the Guardian, or later this would be published in South Magazine, and then the bank would turn up the following week, using him as a contact, saying, Mr. So-and-so who interviewed you, sir, and we are the people who fund that magazine, and establish a whole network of contacts. They did this in Nigeria, they did this in Kenya, they did this in South Africa, in Swaziland. So everywhere they offered services which other banks were more careful about or just refused to have anything to do with. And they used their publicity to show that they were a third world bank. They were in favor of the third world. They were in favor of black people. They were in favor of this, in favor of that, and kept their operation going. And some people were genuinely taken in.
One of the chief financial officer of BCCI says that the bank was solvent and that there were just a few officials at the top who were corrupt. You referred to that before. What do you think about that?
I don't believe it. I do not believe that the junior officers in the bank, branch managers or people employed or journalists who worked for South Magazine were corrupt or knew any of this. They were people, they were people doing a job. But I think all those who were at the upper reaches of the bank knew it was a corrupt and crooked organization. I mean, 10 years ago, I used to meet bankers working for the BCCI who over a glass of beer or a glass of whiskey would say, oh, you know what we refer to the bank inside, banks of crooks and cheats incorporated. So in other words, this culture was known inside the bank to its own employees.
Well, how did, you knew about this, you wrote about this in 1981. How did this go on for so long?
I think that they paid lots of people in order to stay open as a bank. For a long time, the Bank of England did not give them the license to trade as a bank. They were known as licensed deposit takers. Then the laws were changed for other reasons, and they began to trade as a bank. My own feeling is that a lot of money exchanged hands. We know how they operated in the Third World. They bribed everyone. And they helped people, let's put it like that, to be more euphemistic, in their favorite causes. But, it's not a bribe for people to go, buy a yacht or a private plane, but it amounts to the same thing, in my opinion. Accepting money from a bank, favors are expected in return.
What about the regulatory authorities here in Pakistan? Do you have any information on those?
Well, in Pakistan, Abadi had the president and leading generals and politicians and civil servants in his pocket. And regulation is not a strong point of the Pakistani financial establishment. It's largely in sort of society which cannot be regulated. No one takes regulation seriously. Britain is a much more serious matter. The question I ask myself, when people like me, knew, when a few other journalists knew, when people inside the bank knew, is it seriously possible that Price Waterhouse, the main regulators, the aristocracy of the English financial establishment, was so dumb that they went into this bank and they didn't know what was going on?
Did you go to them and say, with your evidence?
We certainly did. When we made our program for Channel 4 television here, we sent them a list of 15 or 20 questions and said, if you don't wish to appear, at least answer these questions.
They were questions like?
They were questions like the one I've posed. How is it possible that you didn't know? They have not so far replied to it. They claimed lots of files were missing. We then proved or demonstrated that the files were here, that the files were in their the headquarters of the BCCI in the City of London for a long, long time. But no one asked to see them.
Tell me briefly about the Abu Dhabi connection, because there were a number of bank officials arrested in Abu Dhabi recently, including Mr. Naqvi, who was one of the top people in the bank.
The Abu Dhabi connection started in the late 70s, early 80s, when Mr. Abadi persuaded the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi to invest his money in the BCCI and stop investing it in a local bank, and he assured him that his bank would make more money, they'd look after his money, they would be his guardians. And the Sheikh was convinced by Abadi, who's quite a convincing talker. And so the Sheikh's money went in, and then increasingly the Sheikh began to look at the bank more closely, and finally he was told that the Abadi and Naqvi were up to no good, and he fired them. But he couldn't totally clean up the operation. So it's a link which goes back a long way. I mean, if the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi hadn't put any money in or hadn't saved the bank when it ran into trouble in the 80s, the bank would have collapsed a long time ago.
Where do you see all of this going?
I think it could go two ways. It already has become the financial scandal of the 20th century. There could either now be a gigantic cover-up, because the people they bribed, Abadi and Naqvi, kept detailed lists, and they have the proof of all the people who took money from them. They have these lists. Where these lists are kept, in which safe, when they will be brought out into the open, I do not know. Which is why Mr. Naqvi's arrest in Abu Dhabi is very important. If he is extradited to the States, he could tell some stories which would shock financial establishments and rock the City of London.
Well, Tariq Ali, thank you.
Thank you.
For the record, Price Waterhouse says that BCCI withheld key files from the accounting firm's audits. Price Waterhouse adds that it expressed concerns about BCCI to British regulators well before the July shutdown.